So I think the tribulation started in 2020. It's running until 2027. And this parable of the fig tree, it fits. Well, hey folks, thanks for watching. This is about the mystery of the fig tree. In the parable of the fig tree found in Matthew 24, Jesus gives us a mystery. And he says, that the fig tree would be a sign, and that when it puts forth its leaves, it would be something that we should watch for, and that would mean his return was near. And he said this generation that sees it would not pass away before he returned. It begins in Matthew 24, starting in verse 29, and we see immediately after the suffering of those days, the sun will be dark and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of heaven will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man arriving on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he will send his angels with a loud trumpet blast, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. And this is exactly what he says prior to giving us the parable of the fig tree, is now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. All right, so that is the big promise, and it begs the question, though. All right, so what is this fig tree that's budding? What does that mean? Is the return of Israel, which is the case that I'm going to make here, is that really the budding of the fig tree? And what does it mean, this generation? When is the end of a generation? When is this time window that he's telling us about? All right, so the return of Israel is something that happened in May 14th, 1948. Ben-Gurion declared the state of Israel. Some people have wondered if that is really a truly modern miracle, or is this something that just man did in his own wisdom and will? And to answer that, let's look at Isaiah 66:8. Who has ever heard of such things? Who has ever seen things like this? Can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? Yet no sooner is Zion in labor than she gives birth to her children. So this is a big verse. Can a nation be born in a day? If you think about in the past, in any time except modern times, nations were born by war. They were taken. They were not made by decree, by committee. The kind of things that we see today that create nations didn't exist until these modern times. So this is amazing prophecy to say that it can happen in a day. That's why it's written in this way, that can a nation be born in a day? No, of course not. Except God was looking forward to our day and knew that. So that definitely happened in a day. Now there's another time that people think about for the birth of Israel was June 7th, 1967. And that would be the Six-Day War, and when Israel reclaimed East Jerusalem and got the Temple Mount back, and Israel was kind of healed from what had happened in 1948. As soon as they declared they were a nation, they were attacked. They were invaded by Jordan and a bunch of other the surrounding Muslim countries. And there was ultimately an armistice line that was drawn that split Jerusalem in half. And so it was kind of like half a nation, even from the very beginning. They didn't receive all of their nation because they were instantly at war. So we think about 1948, 1967, both possible dates to consider. And then we need to think about, what's a generation? How long is that? And there are several definitions that we could use in Scripture. So we, leaves it, again, kind of a puzzle, a mystery. We have to work it out. We have to think about it. Which one could it be talking about? So if we go back to the Exodus and the time of Moses and Joshua. In Joshua 5:6, it says, the Israelites had moved about in the wilderness for 40 years until all the men who were of military age, which meant over 20, when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. So there's two possible times, 40 years or really 40 plus 20, because the people who died were 60 or older. Okay? And then in Psalm 90, verse 10, our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. It's another interesting, and it gives you kind of a range, 70 to 80 years. All right? And then in Genesis 6:3, then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. Now, a lot of people have wondered what this means. It probably means several things. For example, it may have been, God may have said this 120 years before the flood. But also, if you look at mankind right now, we have 8 billion people on the earth, and there's not a single person out of those 8 billion who's over 120. That's a pretty good statistical test to say, yes, mankind in general, since the days of the flood and shortly thereafter, the patriarchs, from the time of the writing of Moses, you don't really find people living over 120 years. So is it 40? Is it 60? Is it 70, 80, 120 years? Any of those are kind of possible, and they give us something to look for and think about, right? So the first test, though, we can do is 40 years. So did Jesus mean that this generation, 40 years, would not pass away until all these things take place? And if you look at 1948 or 1967 forward, those dates have already passed. 1988, 2007. So it definitely didn't mean just 40 years. And then some people might say, well, but what about 30 to 33 AD, which is when Jesus was crucified, to 70 AD? That was somewhere between 37 and 40 years. That's less than 40 years. And could that have referred to the destruction of Jerusalem? And, was 70 AD the fulfillment of this generation? Did all these things that Jesus said take place? And it's like, no, it can't be, because the verses that I just read you about Jesus returning in power and glory and gathering the elect, that didn't happen. So some parts of it did. The destruction of Jerusalem happened, but not all of it. And so then we know that prophecy that Jesus gave is a composite prophecy that includes some earlier events, but it certainly doesn't include all this later stuff that we're looking at, that we just talked about. And ultimately, we're looking for a repeat of 70 AD in the last days. Revelation 19, Jerusalem surrounded by armies, Ezekiel 38 and Ezekiel 39. So we definitely have the expectation that this is going to happen again. And then the other thing is Israel, who we believe is represented by the fig tree, was still in leaf when Jesus was speaking. So the fig tree hadn't budded. The fig tree was in bloom, but it had not yet then withered and gone into a long winter. And in fact, if we think about Israel, the withered fig tree, in Matthew 21:19, there's this account of Jesus. After noticing a fig tree by the road, he went to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. And he said to it, never again will there be fruit from you. And the fig tree withered at once. So this is a kind of a symbol of what would happen to Israel. That Israel was in leaf. They should have had fruit, but they didn't. All right, but some might be thinking, doesn't Mark 11:13 say that it wasn't the season for figs? But then there's something to know about fig trees is the main crop, yes, comes later. But there's an early crop that when the leaves first come out, there's also early figs that also appear right when those first leaves are coming. So yes, it wasn't the main season, but it should have had figs. And so then people could go, well, yeah, it looks like Jesus was cursing the fig tree, but as a picture of what was going to happen to Israel because they were rejecting their Messiah. And it's really exactly what Jesus prophesied in Matthew 23:38 when he said, behold, your house is being left to you desolate. And especially in Luke 19:43 to 44, when he said, for the days will come upon you when your enemies will put up a barricade against you and surround you and hem you in on every side, and they will level you to the ground and throw down your children within you, and they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. And that, I think that's a valid way to look at it, because within 40 years, Israel was no longer a country. The temple was destroyed, the Jews were scattered, and it was certainly a judgment from God that we see, because when disaster befalls a city, is it not the Lord has done it? It lays a great principle for we know that God is always sovereign over everything that happens, and the good and the bad. And when he's done something like that, we know that, well, why? Because of sin, because of our wickedness, because of our rebellion against God. But after 1,878 years, when Israel became a nation again, then you can go, oh, now the fig tree did bud. All right, it was gone, it was dead, it was in a long winter, and then it brought forth its leaves again. And we know that this is also something that was prophesied, because there's a prophecy, and that this was something that was going to happen. God always intended to bring Israel back as a nation again, because of Isaiah 11:11. Then it will happen on that day that the Lord will again recover with his hand the second time the remnant of his people who will remain from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. So it's so amazing that it says, not only will he recover his people, but he will do it a second time. So then we go, oh, absolutely, this is something that God always intended to do. So the first regathering was in Ezra and Nehemiah's day when the temple was rebuilt between 516 and 409 BC. But that phrase, a second time, tells us that now is the time. We're seeing the second time. And that tells us also our Messiah is the time for our Messiah to come again. All right, so now let's count the years for 60, 70, 80, 120 years and look at those dates. So 1948 plus 60 years is 2008. So that's also come and gone. But 1967 plus 60 years is 2027. Wow, if you haven't seen my book, Witnessing the End, this is the time that I think actually is the final end of 490 years, a second set of 77s. This prophecy also lines right up with that. And even if we look at 1948, from 70 to 80 years, if we add that, it's 2018 to 2028. So I think the tribulation started in 2020. It's running until 2027. And this parable of the fig tree, it fits. So it's not the only possible window, but we're in it right now. And it lines up with a bunch of other things. So I think, yes, this definitely bears consideration. Some people are thinking about 2030, 2033, even, further. Some people think, who knows when the Lord's going to come back. Well, if we look at the 70 to 80 plus 67, 1967, yeah, then we're still looking at 2037, 2047, even out to 2087 for this understanding of a generation being, one of those time periods, and that the start and was the budding of the fig tree was Israel. So it's reality that will prove or disprove that kind of, theoretical understanding of the prophecy. Because remember, prophecies are puzzles. They are not turn-by-turn directions. It is something that we think about and work over, and there are multiple possibilities. And so you have to keep an open mind, and you have to keep thinking about and keep watching. But none of this is happening by accident. God knows exactly what he's doing. He's given us hints, but he's made it so that it's a puzzle that we have to watch and keep engaged in if we want to know what's going on. And there's another thing that this is key. Like, how do we know this is the last days? Then the nations will know. Then the nations around you that remain will know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt what was destroyed and have replanted what was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. Ezekiel 36:36. So this, again, God is very clear. He always intended to bring Israel back, to reestablish them as a nation, that he was going to be the one who was doing it. Not because, Israel deserved it, not because they were the most righteous people on the planet, but because God chose them. And he chose to reveal himself through them. And he's also chosen them for these last days to be the center focus for this end time scenario that's playing out. And even right now, all eyes are fixed on Jerusalem. They're all fixed on watching what's going on with Israel. The nations are raging over it, and it's exactly what God said would happen in the last days. So this is really something that, is a sign for us to recognize that we're in the last days. There is this countdown of time that's revealed in Scripture that points to 2027, somewhere between 2027 and 2018 to 2028. We are right now in that window. A lot is happening. I truly believe this is the time for all these things to take place, and I hope you're watching with me. If you check out my book, Witnessing the End, you can download free PDFs copies from witnessingtheend.com, and you can find the whole case for all this time that I'm talking about. And I hope you'll judge the evidence for yourself. There really has never been a time in the last 2,000 years with signs like we're seeing, and it's something to be paying attention to. So find me on endtimesberean.com, also is my website. I have more videos there that you can link to on my news and media page, and you can email me and ask questions or comments at christian@endtimesberean.com. So thank you for watching. All right, Maranatha.